Hi, it's Marie from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you again tonight. Well, yesterday's story in this book, The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, the chapter was really, really long. And so I got tired. So I'm going to finish the chapter, but I'll go back and I'll review a little bit so that we catch up, okay? So the name of this chapter was called Cap Garland. And they were at school, and Laura was unhappy because it was pretty warm and she had to wear these woolen flannels and they were itchy and hot, but her mom said it was the time to wear them in the winter. So Laura went to school even though she was miserable and she was wearing them, and suddenly it was like something had covered the sun. It got dark and it was gray, and Laura recognized right away, and Carrie, that a blizzard was hitting. And they had seen from the winter before what a prairie blizzard was like and knew how horrible and dangerous it was. So Mr. Foster came to lead them away back home, and the teacher was following, but they couldn't see each other. And only when the blizzard would lighten up just a little bit could they see shadows ahead of them and try to catch up. So Laura was afraid that they were taking too long to get back to town and that they could miss the whole town. And I'm just going to go ahead and start reading a little bit more, okay? One time, Pa at Plum Creek had lived 3 days in the bank during a blizzard, but there was no creek banks here. Here was nothing but bare prairie. Pa had told about sheep caught in a blizzard, huddled together under the snow. Some of them had lived. Perhaps people could do that too. Carrie was too tired to go much further. She was too heavy for Laura to carry. They must go on as long as they could. Then, out of the whirling whiteness, something hit her. The hard blow crashed against her shoulder and all through her. She rocked on her feet and stumbled against something solid. It was high, it was hard, it was the corner of a wall. Her hands felt it, her eyes saw it, as she walked against some building. With all of her might, she yelled, "Here! Come here! Here's a house!" All around the house, the winds were howling, so that at first no one heard her. She pulled the icy, stiff muffler from her mouth and screamed in the blinding storm. At last, she saw a shadow in it. 2 tan shadows thinner than the shadowy wall she clung to. Mr. Foster and the teacher. Then the other shadows pressed close around her. No one tried to even say a thing. They crowded together, and they were all there. Mary Power and Minnie, each of the little Beersley girls, Arthur Johnson and Ben Woolworth, and the small Wilmoth boys. Only Cap Garland was missing. They followed along the side of the building until they came to the front of it. And it was Mead's Hotel at the very north end of Main Street. Beyond it was nothing but railroad tracks covered with snow, the lonely depot, the wide open prairie. If Laura had only been a few steps nearer the others, they would have all been lost in the endless prairie north of town. For a moment they stood by the hotel's lamp-lit window. Warmth and rest were inside the hotel, but the blizzard was growing worse, and they all must reach home. Main Street would guide all of them except Ben Woolworth. No other building stood between the hotel and the depot where he lived. so Ben went into the hotel to stay until the blizzard was over. He could afford to do that because his father had a regular job. Minnie and Arthur Johnson, taking the little Wilmarth boys, had only to cross Main Street to Wilmarth's grocery store, and their home was beside it. The others went on down Main Street, keeping close to the buildings. They passed the saloon and Royal Wilder's feed store, and then they passed Barker's grocery. The Beersley Hotel was next, and there the little Beersley girls went in. The journey was almost over now. They passed Coss's hardware store and they crossed 2nd Street to Fuller's Hardware. Mary Power had only to pass the drugstore now. Her father's tailor shop stood next to it. Laura and Carrie and Teacher and Mr. Foster had to cross Main Street now. It was a wide street, but if they missed Pa's house, the haystacks in the stable were still between them and the open prairie. They did not miss the house. One of the lighted windows made a glow that Mr. Foster saw before he ran into it. He went on around the house corner with Teacher to go by the clothesline, the haystacks in the stable, to the Garland house. Laura and Carrie were safe at their own front door. Laura's hands fumbled at the doorknob, too stiff to turn it. Pa opened the door and helped them in. He was wearing an overcoat and cap and muffler. He had set down the lighted lantern and dropped a coil of rope. "I was just starting after you," he said. In the house, Laura and Carrie stood taking deep breaths. It was so quiet there. The winds did not push and pull them anymore. They were still blinded, but the whirling icy snow had stopped hurting their eyes. Laura felt Ma's hands breaking away the icy muffler, and she said, "Is Carrie all right?" "Yes, Carrie's all right," said Pa. Ma took off Laura's hood and unbuttoned her coat and helped pull out of its sleeves. "These wraps are driven full of ice," Ma said. They crackled when she shook them, and little drifts of whiteness shifted to the floor. "Well," Ma said, "all's well that ends well. You're not frostbitten. You can go to the fire and get warm." Laura could hardly move, but she stooped and with her fingers dug out the caked snow that the wind had driven between her woolen stockings and the tops of her shoes. Then she staggered towards the stove. "Take my place," Mary said, getting up from her rocking chair. "It's the warmest." Laura sat stiffly down. She felt numb and stupid. She rubbed her eyes and saw a pink smear on her hands. Her eyelids were bleeding where the snow had scratched them. The sides of the coal heater glowed red hot, and she could feel the heat on her skin. But she was cold inside. The heat from the fire couldn't reach that cold. Pa sat close to the stove, holding Carrie on his knee. He had taken off her shoes to make sure her feet were not frozen, and he held her wrapped in a shawl. The shawl shivered with Carrie shivering. I can't get warm, Pa." "You girls are chilled through. I'll have you a hot drink in a minute," said Ma, hurrying into the kitchen. She brought them each a steaming cup of ginger tea. Oh, I love ginger tea. Feels nice and warm. "My, that smells good," said Mary, and Grace leaned on Laura's knee, looking longingly at the cup till Laura gave her a sip, and Pa said, "I don't know why there's not enough of that to go around." "Well, maybe there is," said Ma, going into the kitchen again. It was wonderful to be there, safe at home, sheltered from the winds and the cold. Laura thought this must be a little bit like heaven, where the weary are at rest. Weary means tired. She could not imagine that heaven was better than being where she was, slowly growing warm and comfortable, sipping the hot, sweet ginger tea, seeing Ma and Grace and Pa and Carrie and Mary all enjoying their own cups of it, and hearing the storm that could not touch them here. "I'm glad you didn't have to come for us, Pa," Laura said drowsily. "I was hoping you were safe." "So was I," Carrie told Pa, snuggling against him. "I remember that Christmas on Plum Creek when you didn't get home." "I did too," Pa said grimly. "When Cap Garland came into Fuller's and said you were all headed out to the open prairie, you can bet I made tracks for a rope and a lantern." "I'm glad we got in all right," Laura spoke up to say. "Yes, we'd have had a posse out looking for you, though. We'd been hunting for a needle in a haystack," said Pa. "Best forget about it," Ma said. "Well, he did the best he could," Pa went on. "Cap Garland's a smart boy." "And now, Laura and Carrie, you're going to bed and get some rest," said Ma. "A good long sleep, that's what you need." Did you know that when you sleep, that helps your body heal? We call that rejuvenating. Gets it nice and fresh. Well, that was a very, very long chapter, but it ended good. Have any of you ever been in a blizzard? I can't say that I've ever been in a blizzard, but some of my children and their families have been in blizzards before. And my son and his family that live in Alaska, they definitely have blizzards there. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house and out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. Good night. God bless you. Oh, happy Sabbath.